Hello, everyone, and thank you to audience and filmmakers alike for joining. My name is Andrea Thompson. I'm the founder and director of the Film Girl Film Festival, and I am here with the remarkable filmmakers of Shorts Block 5. And, oh, excuse me. Oh my goodness, brain freeze. Shorts Block 3, excuse me. Oh God. Yes, Shorts Block 3. Excuse me all for the brain freeze. Opening weekend. And yes, once again, thank you everyone for joining me. I'd like to go around and have each of you share your name and which film you direct, and then we'll get right to talking about your films. John, why don't you go first?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is John Klein. I am the co-director and co-cinematographer of the film Static Space with my friend and partner, Kate.
And Kate?
Yep. Hi.
I know you co-director, but...
Yes, I'm Kate Black-Spence, co-director of Static Space, also the writer and actor.
And Kirsty?
Hi, I'm Kirsty, and I wrote and directed the short Don't Bloody Look.
Wonderful. And last but by no means least.
Hi, I'm Denise Powers, and I wrote and directed Un Mec Gentil, A Nice Guy.
Once again, thank you. And one thing I've noticed, if your shorts all have a common theme, which was actually accidental on my part, the way I curated it, this all explores in their way the theme of connection. So Kate and John, I'd like to start with you guys because your connection might be the most unique in that it's about a woman who connects with another woman she cannot see in space. So I'd like both of you to share, if you could, like how you came up with this concept and did anything inspire it for you?
Sure, I think that makes sense for me to take that one. So I actually based this off of a novel written by John Cannon, who gave me permission. The novel is called Can You Hear Me? And it is a lovely, gentle, romantic romp between a woman in Indiana and a woman who is orbiting Earth in space. In writing it during the pandemic, I felt really drawn to that story, that concept, the idea of isolation without having to identify a pandemic being the source of it, because I think we all have existed in our own isolation since well before the pandemic. There's a lot of screens separating us, and it just felt like this was definitely the time to explore it. And so I wrote the play. John Klein read the play and suggested that we make it into a short. John, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I read the play over the summer before we made the film, and to echo Kate's point, I feel like everyone I think connects with the times where we screened the film. Everyone's connected with it in a very specific, non-COVID way, because I think it speaks to things that all of us have gone through in different ways. By it being such a specific story, it winds up being a very universal story. So like I watched the movie. When I was making the movie, I was thinking of my wife and the long distance relationship we had when we were first starting to date. And everyone will look at it and think very different things about the film in that way. So yeah, I found that was part of what appealed to me about the story that Kate wrote in the play, and that then she so beautifully sort of expressed by focusing the story on Jamie for the short film.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. And Kirsty, your film is also about how connections can feel like very suffocating in a way, because in your story, this girl gets her first period, and a lot of all of us but John, I think, to single you out, can relate to that feeling where we got so nervous, I think, probably going to the store for the first time and you're afraid people laugh at you. So it's an interesting way to tell these feelings we experience is when we first started menstruating and found this whole new like experience, like should we embarrass, should we be proud? So why did you decide to tell this particular story in that particular way?
Well, I think a lot of us, particularly sort of older generation, which I include myself in, would have those anxieties, and and I just I remember like hating having to buy tampons or pads, and I've sort of grown out of that, but I feel like I forced myself out of that. And I was talking to, because I was coming up with the idea, and I was talking to my producer of it, and she was saying she still has those anxieties. And I started doing a bit of research, and it just showed that here in the UK in particular, there's still a lot of taboo about the subject. I mean, it's worldwide, it's quite a taboo subject in most countries, but there's a lot of anxiety still with kids. And I just wanted to highlight the kind of thoughts that can go through your mind. And even as you get older, that a lot of women still have those kind of fears inside, like, oh, I don't want to leak, or I don't want to show that I'm on my period. And I just want to open that conversation and just really normalize it, because it is so normal, and kids these days should not feel embarrassed about it at all. So the kind of anxiety, I just wanted to kind of highlight and almost exaggerate what those anxieties are, and then show those against the reality of, in modern day, most people actually now don't care, even though it is still a bit of a taboo subject. But it's just trying to show the young women and young boys, that it is a subject we can talk about, and it doesn't have to be an embarrassment for people.
Yeah, I thought I was over it, but then even saying it now, I had trouble saying it, I discovered, which is insane, because I'm an adult, I'm in my 30s, I run a women's film festival, and still but yeah, hopefully it will be different. It will be different soon. Hopefully it is different. And Denise, your film is also quite extraordinary, in that it shows how this man and this woman end up connected, and how differently they see the situation. He sees it as kind of like an opportunity for romance. She's afraid, terrified she's getting stalked. And so I believe there's a particular situation that inspired this. So can you tell us more about that, and why you decided to make such a personal situation into a film?
Well, a couple things inspired it. It was just kind of watching a lot of romantic comedies on the sort of festival circuit that I just, they were such improbable situations that it would be like, if this were real life, like no woman would go for that ever, not ever, and it's a certain amount you suspend disbelief, but when you really kind of step back, I think something certainly at the heart of French culture is the idea of the gallant pursuit. And if a pursuit is gallant and noble, then really any means justify the ends, and it doesn't take much for that to slide into kind of patterns of abuse or violence. I don't think. And so I think that's kind of one of the reasons that violence against women is so consistently ignored over here. But the sort of inciting incident that comes out of my own personal experience that I suppose that you're asking about is, it was kind of a stupid thing, but I was in the process of getting a divorce, and I left the entire folder of documents, in the metro in Washington, D.C. And, and I kept thinking somebody just opens it up and they see this whole world, that, this person's getting divorced and, and all this other stuff. And so I ran back to go get it immediately and couldn't find it. And then mysteriously, I was in my apartment 3 weeks later, and it just slid under the door. And I thought, okay, so who got through 2 security doors to get to my doorstep and slide the thing under my door? And and so I just imagined this ridiculous scenario of somebody who sort of was trying to engineer some encounter out of it, and then chickened out at the last minute or something. So that's kind of what how I initially imagined the incident.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing and making that. Then that's yes. And John and Kate, I'm kind of directing this question to both of you again. again, your story is a very different kind of sincere love story with a very improbable, going off of Denise, but it is very improbable, and I feel like in a good way, between two women. And that makes me curious, after years of kind of being taboo or almost fetishized or greatly fetishized on screen, like same-sex relationships and love stories have become like trendy. And so I'm wondering, like, in theory, like, these kinds of stories are stuff that want to be told, but I'm wondering if you experienced like any kind of hardship, like gender-related hardship, in bringing this story to fruition. Like, if there was any difference between you two as co-directors. Oh, and also, hello. This is Danae. She's joining us recently as she's the director of Managed, and I will get right back to you. I just asked Kate and John a question. I will introduce you after they have answered it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and again, as the writer and sort of where the ideas sort of originated, I'll start my answer on that one. I have, as a bi woman who's in a straight presenting marriage with a man, I have been frustrated for years about the representation of specifically bisexual women, but in general, all queer women, I feel like, are often told, like, their love stories are told through the male gaze, or they're told, but then with a heavy emphasis on the trauma of their relationship, or the trauma that made them lesbian or something. It's a very antiquated idea of queerness, but it's also not gone. And I have started seeing a sort of trend towards just telling more gentle queer stories. Specifically, I think Schitt's Creek is one that I think was one of the first that really started doing that well. And I was really focused on why that is, why that's so rare, and why it's so hard to find. So when it came time to take this story that I had read that I thought did it very well in although again, a romantic novel, it's sort of an erotic novel, I wanted to take sort of that aspect away and just focus on this universal concept of it's just a love story. In the same way that Notebook isn't a straight romance movie, it's just a romantic movie. I wanted to do the same with Jamie and Noah and just focus on that. And I think that's really how we start to normalize queerness, instead of holding it up as some sort of a token or trophy. And I think what means a lot to me is, while we've been getting into a lot of queer film fests, what I'm hearing everyone saying is just that it's a beautiful love story. And like, that's really what I wanted to achieve. I think that's something that I'm still hungry to see more of in the world. I don't know, like, when you say that it's a trendy thing right now, I hear that, but I also still feel like it's often done in a very specific way that
yes, definitely. There are a few exceptions. I feel like the Owl House. I see it more in kids shows, to be honest, like the Owl House and She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, to be honest.
I'm not as familiar with the kids shows, but I'm also delighted to hear that the representation is starting at a younger age.
Oh yeah, it's crazy now. Like, those are all another Netflix show, Kipo, like that has a queer relationship between two guys that's treated as very normal and stuff. I think, and the guy actually saying, "I'm gay." I don't think a kid show has ever had a character say that.
Yeah, it's always hinted at, right, with like Bert and Ernie and things, and I think that's fine to some extent, just normalizing it on a subconscious level. But let's also just take it to the conscious level. Kids today are, I think, more familiar with queerness, and also we still need it to be addressed and not make it a novelty. So
definitely.
I was going to say, because I'll echo that aspect of it, and the trendiness of it. I think that the challenge that a lot of queer content is that it's not, especially on a mainstream level, like you look at every Disney production that has a queer coded character, but it is never actually explicitly stated that this character is queer. And so every time there is a love story that is a deliberately queer love story, that gets a lot of press because it's still a strangely unique thing in mainstream cinema and mainstream television. And so for us to kind of, I loved the way that this story centered that and made that just the fabric of this connection between them. And it's not about them being like, it's not about them being straight or gay or bi or anything like that. It's just these two people need each other. They need the connection that they've fostered because they are both in states of being completely alone and cut off from that kind of connection.
Well, I will say that's not the Owl House direction, but when I saw reactions to people, like some people were literally falling out of their chairs when one girl kissed another out of the cheek. They're like, "This is Disney," because that's a Disney show on Disney Channel.
Yeah.
So
and that's amazing that those things happen. And I think that the challenge is then like, what's the level up? Like, what's the point at which we start just acknowledging these things in mainstream cinema as something that's just kind of a normal thing, and not like as like a one line side character like in Onward, which is still great to see that, but as something like, okay, well, when are we going to really first and foremost center those kinds of stories? And not saying it has to be every story. It doesn't have to be a trendy thing. It just has to be a normal thing.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be trendy
normal.
like this before it becomes just a part of like for everybody here. Like I still have to refer to you all as female directors and ask you questions about gender and the festival slots to exist. And I'd love to refer to everybody as just all of you ladies and John as directors. But sadly, that still hasn't been fully normalized, I don't think. But yes, thank you. And what was I going to write? My next question. And Kirsty, yes, on that one, your short film explores a lot of perspectives on, you know, a girl starting their first period. Universal story that we've seen. A lot of us have felt embarrassed, but at the same time, like a lot of her peers like stand up for her, especially when other girls start kind of try to make this difficult for her. And I guess my question is, was that more inspired, I guess? Do you feel that is the case with younger kids now, or do you think your short is more how you hoped girls are treated?
No, unfortunately, there is still a lot of bullying. You know, I was looking at the statistics, and more than half of teenage girls have been, you know, made to feel like they're dirty or gross and being called names whilst they're on their period. A lot of girls are still missing school because of it. The ending for me was I flip-flopped around quite a lot because I didn't know quite how I wanted to end it because one of the biggest things I think when you're a young girl, if you've got a crush on a guy, again, if you're embarrassed about something, the last thing you want to do is have that embarrassment happen in front of them. And so it was, you know, she's obviously caught with these sanitary towels in front of her crush, and it's that moment of waiting to see what his reaction is. And it felt like the girls, you know, they come over and they come to, like, you know, give her a bit of, you know, banter and laugh at her about the situation and take the mick. And I really wanted to just kind of highlight that actually this isn't just a subject for girls. This is a subject for boys. Boys feel comfortable about this as well. And so that was kind of why I ended on that ending of him actually being able to be like, do you know what? This is normal. So I don't get what you're laughing about. So that's kind of why I went that route.
Lovely. Oh, and I believe we lost Janae, but she's joined us again. Hello again, Janae. Thank you for joining us again. Denise, I will get to you in a minute. But can you tell us the name of your short, and tell us about it?
Are you speaking of me?
Yes, Janae.
It's called Managed, and it's about a talent manager who finds out that her big and one and only, like the biggest client, like a Tom Holland like superhero, young client, he just suddenly has this existential crisis, and he doesn't want to perpetrate celebrity culture while he's basically at the peak of his career, which is bad news for her. And so she tries to calm him down during this whole meltdown. And he eventually fires her because he wants to go with his conviction of true art and true expression and go back to the theater and not, deal with capitalism or any of this nonsense of celebrity culture. And
until she basically replaces him, right?
Exactly. So she fires him, and then an influencer comes in with more followers than him, than the actor, the client that fires her. And she just goes, okay, well, I know how to get my revenge, and I'll get it sweet. And so he comes back and says, no, you got to take me back now. Everything I just said, forget about it. I want this.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that's not a story about a male celebrity that you often hear. So why did you decide to go from that perspective of a female agent? I also very rarely, I'm not sure I very rarely see female agents. So
you do. I mean, everybody just knows Ari. We all know Ari. And we know, Ari like scream at Lloyd and go, come on, let's move it. And it's like, let's go. And so you kind of have that macho, like bravado, so to speak. But with Susanna, who's played brilliantly by Savannah Ballows, she's this talent manager she's very manic and she's losing her mind. And so that was great to be able to explore for Savannah and for me. And especially for Sean Patterson, our composer, he was tracking a lot of her characters or quirks and different things, and that created an anchor for him through the score. But it is important. It's important to be able to see through the eyes of a female in a big position who can handle herself, but at the same time who can be manic and who can go, I don't know what's going on. And she can take off her shoes, her high heels, and just completely look like she's in desperate need for like a Xanax. And so that balance of, big woman, big position, can get things done, has a great, well-known, established client, a celebrity client, but somebody who's just wants to pull out her hair as well. I love that absolutely, to see females really thrive in both spaces.
Yes, I think we're all very much past the strong female character trope.
Yeah. I mean, and just to touch upon that, I mean, gosh, I've always written features before and produced those, and so I've always heard about let's create strong female characters years ago, and now that's just such a tired thing to say. It's like,
Definitely.
Okay, let's move on from strong female character. What does that even mean? I mean, what does it mean to be a strong female
I demand our female characters be as messy and screwed up as they want to be.
Yeah, I mean, just have them be able to have their hair all over the place. And
we can love Wonder Woman, and we can love Harley Quinn as well.
We can. I mean, there's a time and place for everything, and that's where women being at the forefront and how things are progressing. And need to progress more, that time and place for everything, for the superhero, for the badasses of the world, to Betty Davis in a movie called Human Bondage. She played a mess, and that was in the 1930s. And so I don't understand why, if we can keep that a little bit more consistent, and we should. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Speaking of perspective, Denise, your film has such a fascinating richness of perspectives, even if though you only focus on a few characters, because this male character in the film who sees trying to get these documents back as a romantic moment that goes completely awry, it would have been very easy for you to make him a one-note villain, but you make him very confused and even sympathetic, even when he's clearly taking these wrong actions. So I'm very curious as to why you took this route, how you resisted taking the easier route, I guess, is a better question.
Because I just think that most people think that they're doing the right thing, and most people, like he says, I was trying to do something nice for you, but in a way, it was just projecting his own desire onto the situation, you know. And so, and I think a lot of people do that. I think that's very human. We think that we're doing something for somebody else, but in reality, we're doing it to serve our own needs. And there's a lack of clarity there. And I think, I didn't want to make a dogmatic film or a didactic film. I wanted people to kind of bring their own experience into it. I thought that that would be a way to reach a broader audience, so that, you know, I think if you villainize people, like, I'm not as interested in that. I'm sort of more interested in exploring things that are more multidimensional. And, you know, and she also, you know, is kind of not taking control of her own narrative. You know, it takes a long time for her to really start asserting herself. So, you know, I think what's interesting is that people see the film very differently depending on what experiences they've had in life. And I noticed that even with the poster art, if any of you have seen the poster, when I would show it around, when my designer hit on it, I loved it. And I was showing it to people, and I would say to people, what do you see here? And to a person, every guy said, oh, looks like a wacky French romantic comedy. And the women would say, like, something's dark here, something's not right. You know, it was really interesting how people picked up on that in a very different way. And so it doesn't surprise me that people see it differently.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. And I guess it shows that you really, accomplished your goal with that too. Thank you. And yes, John and Kate, this is a question, again, mostly at Kate, but each time I tend to ask actresses who also direct themselves this question. Is it really hard to, like, basically approach yourself in an honest way? Because I think if I were directing myself on screen, I'd be really harsher on myself than on the other actresses. So I'm curious on the other actors on screen. So I'm curious, like, how do you kind of direct yourself honestly and compassionately, and how did that dynamic, like, go on set? Oh, yeah, you're both.
You're muted.
Sorry. I think it'd be really hard to comment on that without pointing out that as a co-director, I had John, and I had his presence and his eye on set, which was really important for me because it meant that I didn't have to try to have that outside eye on my own performance. John I've worked with him as an actor, working with him as a director multiple times before. This was the first time I ever tried co-directing anything. So it was nice that my direction eyes could sort of be much more focused on the story itself and the honesty and what we were really going for in any given moment, and is the story being told. And I just gave John my full trust that he would watch my performance and be able to say, this moment's not reading true quite yet. Try this again. The best I can say, I know that actors do direct themselves. I'm mad impressed with it. I don't know that I would want to take that on just yet at this point in my very newbie directing career. But I do think that as an actor, I've been doing this long enough. I've been an actor for 15 years. I have the voice in my head that says when I'm not in it and when I'm not being honest to a moment. I would have to rely on that a lot heavier if I didn't have John, but fortunately I did. So
Wonderful. Yes, thank you, John. And do you have anything to add to?
No, I feel like the great thing that the dynamic Kate and I have is, one, we're very communicative with each other in the first place, but also I think on set we did a great job of, well, I was focusing a little more on the cinematography side of things because that's more my background, and Kate, being the writer and being the actress, was focused more on the story. And, you know, like she said, whether or not her performance was coming across as truthful. And I think in that way we were relying on each other in those ways. You know, and there would be times when, you know, we would get behind, or we would have, oh, you know, how can we make this scene work, or how can we make this work? You know, we have an hour to shoot this whole thing. How are we going to do it? And Kate would suggest, you know what, we don't need that. Let's do this instead. And it would be such a great way of, you know, consolidating story elements to focus on what was really important. And that was her. I mean, like, that was just like the ping pong back and forth that we have kind of enabled that fluid, filter-free approach to the storytelling, because we had sort of delegated those responsibilities and were able to collaborate in that way. So yeah.
And I think collaboration is sort of key to our relationship and whatever we've been working on in the past too. So it's helped that we've had a few years of learning how to speak the same language and looking for the same things.
Thank you. Thank you. And Kirsty, I had a question about like kind of the mood on set while you were filming this story. I was just wondering what a lot of the actors in your film are kids, and probably a lot of them are kind of dealing with adolescence and getting their first period and kind of going through that. So how is that like directing the young actors? Like, did they share a lot of stories or feelings about that?
Yeah, so obviously during the casting process, I mean, we were obviously very upfront about what the project was about, and talked to them about the script and making sure that everybody was comfortable with the scenes and what the subject matter was. And just on that note, actually, one of the casting, so we have like a few casting places that we use here, like online sites or whatever, and we actually got a few refusals to post the ad out because of the subject matter, and we were like, this is exactly what we're trying to do here, trying to like normalize this.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so during the casting process we obviously spoke to the kids, and a lot of them were actually quite open about it, and they were there with their parents, and it was just great to see that they could comfortably talk about it. There was obviously the scene in the bathroom with our main character Jess, so Eloise, who was playing Jess, we just had to make sure that we talked her through the whole thing, made
Mm-hmm.
sure we did it in a way that she was comfortable. It was a very close set for that one scene, but yeah, everybody was just fully on board with what we were talking about, because these kids don't want to have to feel ashamed of this either, so they were all very like passionate about trying to start this conversation. So yeah, it was the mood on set was it was fantastic. Everybody was just so on board with this.
Wonderful. And I'm going to go to Denise, because one of the most memorable shots in your film was, well, for me, was near the end, where after all this, the guy asks around and you can see the different perspectives, like they were looking at each other and laughing, and then you see them from the guy's perspective, and it was like the enraging, they're laughing at me. So how was I guess I'm curious as to the process behind that one shot, because I felt like it was so important.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the inspiration for that was the what Margaret Atwood said, that
Mm-hmm.
men's greatest fear is that women will laugh at them, and women's greatest fear is that men will kill them. And so there's this moment where, like, all along you sort of feel sorry for this guy because he's not getting anywhere with this woman, and then he gives it one last chance, and I think at that point the viewer is still kind of like on his side.
Mm-hmm.
And then the entitlement just kind of takes over, and and he says, well, how about if we go for a drink? And she's like
Mm-hmm.
no, like why would you think I would want to go out with you? But I mean, she was not
Mm-hmm.
that mean about it, but he read it as just kind of that they were just mocking him excessively, and and then that sort of led to his kind of distorted perception. And so that's in a sense, we all make our own realities. And
Definitely.
I guess what I wanted to show is that hers was sort of somewhat more anchored in empirically verifiable reality, whereas his was kind of more fantasy driven and more emotional, in fact, more whereas hers was sort of cut and dry and rational and responding to real things going on in her life. His was responding to what was going on in his head.
Definitely. And I bet he saw her as the crazy emotional one, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's always turned around like that. And, and I find that this has been a pattern in my whole life, this whole idea that women are emotional. And it's always when when you're not being emotional, actually, when you're just trying to point out something that's, quite obvious, or, it's just an ad hominem attack that's used all the time to just shut people down that people don't want to deal with, and so I just thought, having that from his distorted perspective, I thought, that's why we use that distorted lens there.
Yes, thank you. That's very interesting. And Janae, on that note, actually, your whole film kind of is the very distorted perspective that is that insider's view of Hollywood, of people who work with those A-listers. So I was wondering if this agent, this very messy, very, very emotional, manic, and very competent agent was inspired by anyone you know, or any situation that you witnessed.
Situations I witness, yes, but I wish I can just say it's one person, or I can say like it's a composite character. I think that a lot of Manage came from a feature that I wrote that didn't really have any legs. And so I liked the idea of something that was in that feature. I lifted it. And then I just went back and forth with this idea of a short, and now it's acting as a pilot. But it's the manager and Albert, the client, the actor. All of this was very much coming from themes of ego and just being frustrated with the industry. I've met, without naming any names, but I've met a lot of, I really can't, because if I did, wow. But I grew up in the industry, and that should say just enough about I've seen things that were pretty, disturbing, one, and two, I've seen actors who are so relatable in the news, and they're projected to be relatable. But when I've met them, they're the most vile people, and the egocentric. Basically all of my experiences started to culminate into, let's make a story about how your actions are different from your words. And so, the interviews we see of celebrities and how anecdotal they are, and those are all done beforehand, where they're thinking to themselves, oh, that's a fun little thing to grab from the set, I'm going to bring it on to Kimmel. And it's just like that cynicism of being in the industry long enough, of seeing the two-face side of it, as a viewer, as an audience member who loves movies, loves cinema, but then as somebody inside the industry, I kind of split that down the middle and attacked it from there. So yeah, I wish I could say one person, but it's multiple celebrities and encounters and producers. So yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I can only imagine. Thank you. And speaking of location, John and Kate, your location of where you chose to film Static Space played such a large role in the story. So I'm just curious as to why you decided to set it in Indiana.
Well, so I grew up in Indiana. There's a lot of, I joke that this is my Stockholm syndrome love letter to Indiana. It is a place that I'm grateful that I had experiences there, that I did, and also a place that I knew from a young age I needed to get the hell out of. It is difficult to find one's own sexuality. I think that is true today in Indiana, as true as it was 20 years ago in Indiana. And I don't think it's going to change in the next 20 years, unfortunately. So I wanted it to be told there. When John Cannon wrote the book for Can You Hear Me, he actually based the character of Jamie off of me, because he'd seen some things that I had made, films and web series and things. And so he sent me the book as a gift and was like, by the way, this character's based on you. And so he had her living in Indiana. So I was able to take the book anyway. And then I was able to say, and almost all of this rings true, but let me also factor in some of the toxic loneliness that comes from feeling like you don't fit in and not knowing why. So to me, Indiana is its own character in this. And one of my favorite experiences is going to a film fest in Indiana, watching this happen. And there's a line that Jamie says of, "I think I hate Indiana." And it got applause in the theater from this queer audience. And I was like, they understand. Like it might not convey in other places, in other countries, but that was important to me. And John let me fully immerse myself in my dislike of that experience. John, did you say anything to you about, I mean, like the barn in Indiana and all of that, or?
Well, I was just going to say, I think like part of the idea visually too was like getting this isolation to come across just in the way this rural area feels. It's like there's nothing else around. We have these big, we have these sweeping sort of drone shots of the area, and it's like she's like the only truck that drives down this road, and she's the only person, the only house, the only barn in this little subset of trees in this big vast rural expanse. And you feel even more so that level of her loneliness, just because that's what the location is. Like we're Kate and I are from Chicago, and so we're packed in. That's urban life in Chicago. And I've recently moved out to the suburbs, and it's weird just like how much more spread out suddenly things are. And like the more you get out, the more spread out things are. And suddenly you can't throw a rock to your neighbor's house, and you're like, this is crazy. I can't, that's a kind of loneliness that you have to adjust to and adapt to. And Jamie's way of, that she's adapted to that, and just making things in her barn and stuff, like she's able to somehow relate to this person who's orbiting the earth, because that's how it feels to be out there by yourself in its own way.
As a Chicagoan who grew up in not just like smaller towns in Wisconsin and also Wyoming, I very much feel that. Yes.
I'm glad that it's not, and I don't think it's just Indiana, and I'm certainly not trying to point any fingers and be like, it's all your fault, but it's the only experience that I had, and I do get the impression that there are people in other states that can relate.
Yes, definitely. And Kirsty, I want to bring the idea of location to your film, because this is very much a London story, but I feel like it could be translate well to other locations. And so do you feel the same, or do you think that this story would change a lot depending on if you decided to film in a different location? In your experience, you probably haven't traveled everywhere in the world, but
no, I mean, different countries do have different approaches when it comes to periods, and so I think it might not translate to everywhere, but I feel particularly in the UK, it almost felt like it could be anywhere, because it was just following her journey from the shop to back to home, and it was sort of in an environment where she would bump into people she knew. So we didn't want to try and make anything too specific location wise, like, she's definitely in a city or she's definitely here. It was more like a town or village that could almost be anywhere. And it was more trying to just focus on that kind of, I think we've all been there. You just walk down the street and you bump into somebody and it's just like, it happens when you also don't want it to happen. So we were just trying to highlight that's the kind of thing that she was going through on her journey.
Thank you. And yeah, Denise, to kind of ask a variation on that question. Your story seems very French, but I have not been to France. Not only French, but very Parisian, which I sadly have not been to Paris. But I think it would translate very, very well to other locations. And so I guess, in your opinion, again, you have not traveled everywhere. I realize that, but how well do you think it would translate to other like locales, cities, countries, in your opinion?
I don't know. I mean, it seems to be getting some good selections in the U.S. So I think it's actually resonating better in the U.S. than it is in France.
Wow.
So that says something, I guess. But yeah, I think I did see it really quite rooted here in part. I don't know if you remember the scene where he's backing up and he backs up into some feminist graffiti, and really 2 years ago when we filmed it, the city was just covered with it everywhere, and it was just so it was just really encouraging to see that, and to see it sort of like gave you this feeling like people are finally talking about this. You know, people are finally talking about the number of women who are killed by their partners, and it's just like it's this moment of being seen, and yet there are people who manage to not see this. And so that's what our protagonist does. He backs right into it without even noticing it, and without even sort of seeing how this might connect to him in some way. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. So in that sense, it was very peculiarly French. And it was very much of that moment because we used decor from the street. But yeah, I guess, you know, it's relevant for any place that I think is starting to talk about cultural transformation, and not just, you know, sort of keeping it to a sort of safer discussion of equal rights. And not that that's not important, but I mean, I think that, you know, some of the things that I'm getting into are kind of beyond that. You know, how do we talk about ingrained, entrenched attitudes and narratives and cultural scripts, if you want to call it that kind of thing. And so I think, yeah,
definitely. You know, that line where you said where you said it hasn't been received so, I believe you said it hasn't been received so well in France.
Yeah, we've only had one selection here in France, and we've had half a dozen in the States, and yeah, I've sent it to many more festivals in France. So it's.
I've heard that before from a few female French directors. Like, I believe A Portrait of a Lady on Fire. That the director of that, she said like they don't think they apparently don't think that film is very sexy in France or something. It hasn't been received nearly as well as it has elsewhere.
Well, yeah, I mean, it did do well. I don't know that she can say it didn't. I mean, it was kind of snubbed, I think, at the Caesars, you know, like, you know, with Roman Polanski winning again. I think that was kind of a particularly brutal repudiation. But no, I think it's done well here. But I think there is kind of a persistent, there's one way that we can engage in women's issues, and, you know, and criticizing or taking issue with a kind of masculine privilege or anything like that. It doesn't seem to be something that's really talked about. And so, or if it is talked about, it's only at your peril. I mean, my last film looked at, it was a comedy looking at a relationship of a younger man with an older woman. And basically he was looking for some sexual experience. And we find out that, you know, he gets upset because for her it was like a one night thing. And so he gets all pouty about it. And we find out, well, in fact, that, you know, her husband left her for somebody like 20 years younger. And so this, when I first presented it, was like, I'd present it in front of 300 people and it would be crickets, you know, like nobody wanted to ask a question. And then afterwards, all of these women would be pulling me aside and saying, you know, my husband left me for a woman who was like 20, younger than my daughter. And I'm like, why didn't you say anything? But they were ashamed. And there's still a lot of that going on. So
another pattern I've noticed, especially with female creators. So, and on that note, Janae, you said you grew up in the industry that basically tends to influence quite a bit of the rest of the world, and how people are viewed. So, how do you, in your opinion, how do you think people function in these spaces where very toxic characteristics are still kind of like openly embraced, like just to succeed in the industry, or encouraged, I guess is a better word.
Within the industry, like you mean by like
within like insiders? Pardon?
You mean by like industry insiders, sort of like the Me Too movement and stuff like that? Like, why was that? Why not say anything, or why was it?
Oh, no. Why they wouldn't say anything is pretty obvious. But in an industry that's trying to reform itself, but yet is still encouraging this toxicity, like, how do you think things are changing?
I mean, I really hope so. I really do hope so. I mean, from what I've seen, definitely. But I think that we don't. I'm a big believer that we don't know what's behind closed doors. So anything could be happening. And also, you know, if we're speaking about toxicity, you know, that stuff just doesn't change. It's a cycle and it's a pattern. Patterns are meant to be broken and cycles are meant to be broken. But within the industry, that's such a large machine. And if something's running well, and it's kind of hard to break that. But I believe in change. I definitely believe change is happening. It's just I'm a little bit gray here. It's because I feel that, and I know that it's people at the end of the day, you know, there's people that are either not so great or they are toxic and they just don't want to change. There was something that Denise said, I believe that, like, you know, people don't think that they're always wrong and something along that. I don't mean to butcher it, but yeah. And then there's also people that are really, really not tolerating it. And you get to see that and hear about it, which is amazing. It's absolutely incredible. So the toxicity of it all, it needs a lot more work, in my opinion. It needs a lot more work, especially growing up in this industry to where I was 5 and I was acting. And I would see my sister, who's 5 years older than me, acting for Nickelodeon, Disney, and all these different jobs. And she would be, we were, you know, a little bit concerned about her because she's so young and she's in these massive corporations. But going back to manage, and now today, so I've seen a lot of progression. I've seen a lot. But now today with managed, I think that what it does really well, and it's a testament to Devin Brochu, the actor who plays the client / actor, and it's a testament to Savannah Vallow, who's the talent manager, and just everybody involved, the producers, everyone, from Matthew Minnelli to Elizabeth Ronslaughter and Sean Patterson. What they did is they really did help me, a team effort, to lift up what you said, influence. Like the industry does have a way of influencing us, and media does have a way of making us feel like, you know, shouldn't we? I'll just say this. Like, I remember seeing a friend watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians, and I said, "Why are you watching this? Why are you watching this stuff?" And she said, "Well, I really like watching the Gucci bags because I can't afford it." And I went, "Oh, all right." So sort of living vicariously through. And she's like, "Yeah, I mean, I can't afford them, but I can watch them, move around with them. And it's pretty awesome that they're able to do that." And it's just like, it feels like a freaking poverty line or some, like, you know, between the viewer and the consumption that you're getting. It's crazy to me. And it feels very unjust and very unfair. And so I thought, what's the best way to be able to talk about that? And I knew it was satire. And like The Player with Robert Altman, you know, he goes into some pretty dark stuff and makes it dark too, intentionally at times. And we didn't go that route, but we went the route of like, let's make this zany, let's make this crazy, over the top, you know, it's going to be something to laugh at, and let's create that absurdity as well, because not everybody who's in the industry has watched this, but thank God they laughed, because everybody can laugh at ego and absurdity. And we nailed it on the head, I like to think, but of course, due to the team effort. So yeah.
Definitely. Thank you. And since we're just about to the end of our hour, I'd like to ask everyone what upcoming projects they have, anything they'd like to shout out. So John, Kate, I'd like to start with you two.
Kate, you go first.
Well, I mean, Static Space is also the play, the feature-length play that obviously goes into a lot more detail and has some big twists that the short film could not, for time's sake. That is Orlando Shakes just finished a production of it as a part of a workshop. They're sort of sitting on the rights right now, but other theaters have expressed interest, so I'm hopeful that gets picked up soon. And I just finished another play. Mostly I focus on plays, unless John gets me involved in terms of film.
Mhm.
But my other play is Enter Greta, which is also about a woman novelist who has a male pen name and discovers that women on Twitter thinks that she's a man who hates women. And it sort of explores why she chose to have a male pen name to begin with. And also it's satirical and it's hopefully joyous until it's not.
Thank you. It's fascinating. And Kirsty?
I'm actually working with the same producer again, and we're again doing another young adolescent focused piece, which is based on bullying. Bullying's changed quite a bit since I was a kid, and there's a lot of different ways they go about it now. So it's I don't want to say interesting, it's horrific, and seeing and hearing what kids are going through at the moment. But there's also, again, another interesting statistic where a lot of kids are actually bullied by their friends. I think it's like something like 57% of bullying is actually done within your friendship group, which is, I find that quite surprising. So we're in the process of writing about that at the moment.
That's like my biggest fear as a parent. I have 3 kids, like 7 and under, and that is my absolute biggest thing I cannot prepare myself enough for, is how that's going to materialize.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Denise?
I am working on a short film. I'm looking for a producer right now for a short film about a woman whose son is accused of sexual misconduct, and it causes memories, sort of repressed memories of the sort of non-consensual origins of her own marriage to resurface. And I'm also working on adapting a novel. I just signed a shopping agreement to get the rights to do that, so doing that too. That's for feature.
For all of you.
Hey, yes, thank you. Thank you. And Janae?
So Managed is a web series in development, and we have each 11-minute episode will be a new client with the same manager and a new existential crisis and damage control that will have to be figured out. So that is up on Kickstarter, or it's going to be launching soon by the end of the month on Kickstarter. And our team is back. Our team is very much back. And then we are in post for a drama 1950s period piece that is, it's an interesting one. It's called Contract Player. And so, yeah, there's that and plenty other ones. But I'm all excited. I forget about mine. I'm excited to hear about yours. So I'll be reaching out.
Excellent, excellent. All these sound wonderful, and we reached the end of our hour. So I want to thank you all for your films and for your patience and for joining me on this discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Andrea.
Thank you. And see you all. Film Girl Film Festivals. Films are still streaming. To all the people watching, watch, rate, etc. Good night, everyone.
Good night.